Hello everyone, Q-ro here. Although most of my friends call me Q and some of students used to call me Professor. So, just call me whatever. Today I'm gonna try to explain to you why balanced landing works the way it does in DVD. A little bit of a disclaimer, I am not a professional video editor and this is basically the first time I'm doing video editing for such a long video, so bear with me. I hope that this is to your liking and that you have fun watching the videos. So, without further ado, let's get this class started.
Does balance work with falling from any distance at all? No, it needs to be a bit. In fact, why don't we test it right now? You see this fall right now, chat? That doesn't trigger balanced landing. But apparently, if you play at 60 FPS, then it does. Let's see. I'm playing at 60 FPS. I'm gonna do the exact same thing. Now it does. Why? I don't know, man.
If only there was someone that actually knew. If only. Oh, I know. Let's check the comment section. I'm pretty sure the community knows what's going on. Nope, that's not it. Let's see, maybe someone else had a different idea. It is kind of close, but not really. Alright, I guess it is up to me to do something about this. Before we dive into answering the question, I think it's very important to also understand how games generally work. Imagine you have a shopping list with a series of items that you want to buy. You could think of this as instructions that you have to follow. So once you enter into the shop, you go like, oh, okay, first I'm gonna buy milk, and then I'm gonna buy eggs. And once I'm done with my shopping, I'm like, okay, I'm just leaving the store, and that's it. So we could say that this is a series of instructions that happens in a sequence. In games, you have the same concept. You basically have a series of events that happen one after the other. In this example, the first event is, are we pressing W? And if we are, we move 4 units. This is an oversimplification and even a little bit wrong, but just for the sake of understanding what's happening, let's say that whatever is in this post-it is 1 frame. But just like with the shopping list, once we finish all the instructions, the frame finishes and we exit the program. We obviously want the game to keep running until we decide it's enough and we close the game. But how do we do this? Well, this is where the game loop comes into place. As the name implies, a game loop is something that loops on itself over and over again. So rather than have a sequence of instructions, like we had in the example with the shopping list, we're gonna have the ability to have the frame happen over and over again. In other words, the amount of times that the loop repeats itself in 1 second is gonna give us the amount of frames that we have for each second. That is to say that if our loop happens once in 1 second, we will have a frame rate of 1 frame per second. Let's dig deeper into this. Imagine that we have 3 players, each of these players with different frame rates. As you can see, player 1 has 1 frame per second, player 2 has 2 frames per second, and player 3 has 3 frames per second. Remember that earlier we stated that each frame has 1 task, move 4 units. So if we run this example going frame by frame, we will notice that the total distance that each player moves at the end of 1 second is completely different, and it's dependent on the amount of frames that happen for 1 second. This is what is known as frame dependency, and what it means for us is that a person with a slower computer or playing the game at a lower frame rate is going to have a disadvantage over someone with a better computer or a higher frame rate. You might notice that this is not what happens in DVD. In the game, if 2 players start at the same point and move in the same direction for the same amount of time, they end up traversing the same amount of distance. So why is that? Well, this is where delta time comes into play. But what is delta time, actually? Delta time is basically the time that passes between 2 frames. In the following example, we have different segmented lines that represent different frame rates, and the length of each line is 1 second. Let's look at the first line with a frame rate of 2. To calculate the delta time for this frame rate, what we need to do is figure out how much time passes between one frame and the next. Since we're saying that the total length of the line is 1 second, and we have 2 frames, all we have to do is divide that and we're gonna get a delta time of 0.5 seconds per frame. If we calculate the delta time for the other frame rates, we're gonna notice that the higher the frame rate, the lower the delta time is. So, okay, we know the delta time, but you might be wondering, how is this ensuring that regardless of our frame rate or the power of our machine, 2 players are gonna end up moving the same distance over the same amount of time? That's easy. What we need to do is ensure that for each frame, we move a distance that's proportionate to the amount of distance we want to move in 1 second. Let's start with the first line. We have already established that the length of the line is 1 second, which means that at the end of the line, we would have moved 4 units in 1 second. If we take that and multiply by delta time, which we have already calculated as 0.5, we will find that for this particular case, if we want to move 4 units in 1 second, the distance that the player will have to move for each frame is gonna be 2 units per frame. If we apply the same logic to the second line with a delta time of 0.25, we will find out that for each frame, the player moved 1 unit. And for the player with the highest frame rate, the amount of distance between each frame is even lower. Have you ever noticed that when you increase the frame rate of a game, it looks smoother? Well, this is basically why. With higher frame rates, you have more steps in between, which allow the movement to be more fluid, as opposed to violently jumping from one position to the next. Notice that the more steps you have for the animation, the fluid it is. This is what frame rate is in action. So far, I have proven that behavior didn't forget to use delta time. But what about balanced landing? You know, the thing that this video is supposed to be about.
When are they gonna get to the fireworks factory?
I know, this explanation may have gone on for too long. We are almost there. This will all make sense in a second, trust me. So, we have two players with different frame rates. They're both moving at 4 units per second. Now, let's say that this green line over here represents the floor. The floor is 2.8 units away from the initial position. Let's assume that this yellowish line represents how much distance you have to fall to activate balanced landing. As time starts passing, we will observe that each player falls at a different rate. This has to do with the delta time. So while the guy playing in a toaster is just there stuck in time waiting for the next frame to come. Once the player with the highest frame rate reaches the floor, something interesting is going to happen. The game is gonna ask a series of questions to determine if balanced landing should be activated. These checks happen on every frame, but for the sake of simplicity, we're only gonna look at them in this particular instance. The game's gonna ask the player, are you grounded? Which, yes, we're grounded right now. Are you inbound? So basically, are you still inside the game map? Which the answer to that is yes. Then it asks, how much was the total distance between when you started falling and when you were actually grounded? In this case, it was 2.8. And finally, the game asked, is this enough distance to activate balanced landing? And well, 2.8 is not higher than 3.1, so no, we're not gonna activate balanced landing for this player. Now let's look at what happened to our player playing on a toaster. On the next frame, so at the end of 1 second, the total amount of distance that he travels is 4 units. Remember, our speed is 4 units per second. As I explained before, the game does the same checks every single frame. So, on this frame the game goes, are you grounded? And the character goes like, no, I'm not grounded. Then the game asks, are you in bounds? So the player goes like, no, I'm not in bounds. So the game is like, okay, let me move you back in bounds. So it moves the player back until it is back inside the map. Then it goes, how much distance did you travel since the moment you started falling? And the player is gonna be like, well, I traveled 4 meters, so the total amount of distance is 4 meters. So the game was like, is that enough distance to activate balanced landing? Let's check. And like, what do you know? 4 is in fact bigger than 3.1, so the game activates balanced landing. Mystery solved, we can all celebrate. Okay, in all honesty, this is my best educated guess. There could be other factors at play, but judging by the evidence, I'm pretty sure this is the most likely explanation. Could behavior fix this? Of course they can. All they would need to do is subtract from the amount of distance that you fall, the amount of distance you get pushed back when you're trying to get put back in bounds. There could also be other solutions to this problem, like using linear interpolation as proposed by Freya Holmér. I'll link the video in the description because it's a really interesting talk, and I think that people that are interested in computer science or just gaming in general would benefit a lot from listening to it. Anyway, thank you for coming to my class. I hope it wasn't too boring and that you understood everything I had to say. If you like this and would like to see more of it, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up and all of that. And with that, I'll let you go back home, so class dismissed. Take care everyone, and see you later. Hey, hello there, welcome to the extracurricular after hours class. I'm going to be brief. I just want to tell you what this channel is about. So it's mostly about game design. So first of all, we're just going to play DVD, have fun, get some clips, some shorts, and analyze it through the lenses of game design. Second, we're going to play some indie games and maybe some games that I have on my backlog and do the same thing. We're just going to analyze them through the lenses of game design. And if the games are interesting enough, we're gonna do a more in-depth analysis. And lastly, we're gonna do long format videos like this one, and they're gonna deal with like game design concepts present in different games, for instance DVD, or it could be other games. The video that I was working on before I decided to do this one was on DVD game balancing and how the vision of the game designers clash with the vision of the community. So anyways, if any of these topics sound interesting to you, just stick around, subscribe to the channel and all of that, follow me on social media. And before you leave, I'm gonna let you in a little secret. If you comment Michael Myers is the best killer in the comments, you're gonna get 5 extra points for the midterms as well as a cookie. So, like do it, get your points, your cookie, and make everyone confused. So having said all of that, take care, bye!